conspiracy. They each had a role to play. They also planned, as you heard, for the eventuality, the prospective potential eventuality that if they were both arrested, what they would do in that circumstance as well, as you heard from Detective Gable. And we heard that some of that evidence came through the testimony of Christopher Austin. Baker told Austin that if he was ever arrested, that he should not mention the defendant. And we heard that the defendant and Baker planned that if they were arrested, the only thing they would admit to would be the affair. And we heard the defendant make a specific statement in writing in her jail letter. And that is contained within Exhibit 226. There were a couple of envelopes of jail mail that were recovered, as you recall, from their cells after the arrest. This was a letter that I believe is dated June 28th. So we're talking about a letter that she drafts within a couple of weeks of the arrest. And she talks about specifically in that same exact language that she only is going to admit, or she only has admitted to an affair of about a year. And you recall they both stick to that plan. So again, it sort of begs the question, because if you are saying, we also hear them make verbal comments about this, and she actually reduces her to writing, if you are saying, I only admitted to an affair of about a year, what is the other thing that you're not admitting to? What is the other thing that you are concealing? When you say, I only admitted to an affair, what is the other thing you're trying to hide? And that is their conspiracy to kill Fabio. And so we also heard the defendant and Robert Baker talk about in these lockup overhears, both in Van Nuys as well as here behind Department 101 in the lockup back there. And you saw some video of what that looks like, that neither of them would testify against the other, neither of them would take any deals, neither of them would give up the other. And we heard Robert Baker saying that he was going to take it to his grave. What is it that he's taking to the grave? It's not the affair, because they admit to the affair. Again, begs the question. So they both agreed prior to this, that was part of the conspiracy, because again, a conspiracy is ongoing until you accomplish, it can be ongoing until you accomplish the object of the conspiracy. The object of the conspiracy, again, is dual, just as I talked about with respect to dual motives yesterday. To kill Fabio, but also to be able to obtain the life insurance money. So this is a conspiracy that's ongoing because they've yet been able to do so. And so they make a pact. They make a pact to maintain their silence because, again, if either of them talked or testified, both of them would go down. And that's why we hear in the lockup those recordings. If you didn't understand what they were talking about, hopefully it's become more and more clear, and you're probably going to need to go back and review some of those recordings and transcripts. But there are statements about the fact that they're not going to say anything, that they're going to maintain their silence, that they're sticking to protocol, or the one the defense played for you on their last day of their case, which was now 2 days ago, where he said, stick to the program, and she says she is. As Detective Gable, again, explained when I mentioned it yesterday, this was their protocol. Protocol is a plan, then they put it into action, and then it becomes the policy. It becomes the program. And you heard me talk about protocols with all the different lab personnel, from the LAPD's crime lab, Randy Zepeda, from Leslie Thompson, from the sheriff's lab, who did the testing on the toothpaste tube that Baker was passing to the defendant containing his semen, There are standards, protocols, policies, practices that are put into play that they follow in order, again, to ensure that the outcome can be verified. And in this case, that's what they're doing. They've put their own program or policy into place because he's a military guy, believe it or not. So again, you need to ask yourselves the question, would Baker really have killed Fabio without the defendant's knowledge, participation, and agreement, without her intent that the murder take place, without her intent to kill, without her intent to agree to this conspiracy? Would he have done that on his own? Because wouldn't that run the very obvious risk that that would backfire and that she would no longer be able to live here in the United States, that she would have to go back to Canada? That would ruin his whole plan of having her member to himself, right? And that would be the reasonable likelihood because she has no means of support here. So again, when he very cavalierly said, when I asked him about this on the stand, well, that was the chance I was willing to take. You really think so? You really think so? If you're willing to murder somebody, don't you want to know that the reason you're doing it is going to be something you can count on? That doesn't pass the common sense test, the smell test, so to speak. So one of the things that you're going to also hear about with respect to the law, and I'm going to talk about in some detail, that the conspirators are sometimes referred to as co-conspirators. Under the law, they don't have to know each other. And remember, we talked about this, I believe, during jury selection. You're going to hear about it again as I go through the law today, and you're going to hear about it again next week from the Honorable Judge Cohen when he reads you the law, that co-conspirators don't have to know each other because you can, in your head, probably come up with plenty of circumstances. If you talked about, let's say, organized crime, right? Not everybody in the conspiracy knows one another. When you think of conspiracy, think of it, you can think of it like a big wheel, right? You have somebody at the center, or maybe a couple of people at the center who are calling the shots. We'll call them the shot callers. And then you have spokes that go out to other individuals who are going to do different things, such as maybe one guy is going to go out and he's going to threaten people. If we talked about, let's say, like organized crime, into paying what they refer to as taxes, right? To support the conspiracy. You can conduct your business here, but you're going to have to pay us in order to leave you alone, right? So you can see how not everybody needs to know each other. As I said, the law is pretty brilliant in this country, because it contemplates various scenarios that criminals would use in order to get off, right? Well, I didn't know these other individuals. Who cares, right? You have to have the elements. Was there an agreement? Was there an agreement between two or more of the co-conspirators? Did you have the specific intent to agree to commit the crime? In this case, murder? Did you have the intent, the specific intent to commit the crime? In this case, it's murder. So as we talked about, the mental state for murder, express malice of forethought, meaning intent to kill, as I discussed at length yesterday, and the evidence that supports that. And was there an overt act? Doesn't mean, as I'm going to talk about in a minute, that you accomplish the object of the conspiracy. But if there's an overt act, an act towards the accomplishment of the conspiracy, you're guilty of conspiracy. You can be guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, even if the murder doesn't happen. And I'm sure all of you have seen crime shows where that goes down, where they uncover a conspiracy to kill somebody, but the person doesn't get killed, right? Because once you meet the elements, the conspiracy is complete. Okay? So that's why you can be guilty of the crime of murder But you can also be guilty of a conspiracy to commit that crime. You can be guilty of one without the other. Okay. So let's talk about what this means, these elements. So the law says that the formation and the existence of a conspiracy can be inferred from all of the circumstances tending to show a common intent. And that makes sense, right? Because it is unlikely in a criminal conspiracy that people are going to reduce their agreement to a writing, like a contract, right? So you have to infer that there was an agreement based on the fact that you have individuals who are showing their intent to act together. And when they come together and act together as a team to bring about the object of the conspiracy, to bring about a crime or a criminal result, that's what the law contemplates. So we don't have to have caught somebody on tape agreeing with somebody else to commit a crime. It can be, again, inferred from the circumstances, okay, tending to show this common intent. Now, as I talked about yesterday, that there are different types of proof or evidence under the law. There's direct evidence where someone sees, like an eyewitness, or you have Christopher Austin or Robert Baker who were involved in these crimes, who tell you, and we know from the testimony of Christopher Austin, there was an agreement between he and Baker, right, to commit this crime. That's why he flew out. That's why Baker sent him the money to come to LA to kill Fabio. We also know that, again, Baker, and I don't want to rely on him for anything, but we have to look at where he is corroborated independently, as I talked about yesterday, because otherwise you can't put any credibility in anything he says. But we have to look at the fact that he himself admitted that he engaged in a conspiracy. In fact, as you heard, he pled guilty to this crime. Well, to plead guilty to the crime of conspiracy to commit murder, he had to have agreed with somebody else, at least one other person, as we talked about just a moment ago. It's the first element. There has to be an agreement between two or more, okay? So Baker tells us he went to Las Vegas. He made plans. He bought a knife. He sent money to Austin. This is back in July of 2016 to bring Austin out. And he's going to bring this, I think he said it was like a 12-inch blade, like some huge knife. Because he wanted to see what Austin would say about the knife. And so he has Austin come out, and they drive, he picks him up at LAX, and they drive out to Las Vegas, where they stay, remember, at Al Birdsong's house in July of 2016. And I'm going to get back to how this all fits into the conspiracy. And while he's there, they discuss this conspiracy to kill Fabio. And so we already know from both Austin and Baker that there's a conspiracy that's been agreed to. So you can have it proved by direct evidence. That would be direct evidence, but you can also have it proved by circumstantial evidence. And as I told you in this case, you have both. You have direct evidence straight out of witnesses' mouths who told you what happened, what they spoke about, what they observed, what was discussed, what they heard, and what they saw. But you also have circumstantial evidence, meaning that you can infer evidence, you can infer facts from the circumstances of the case. And from the circumstances of the case, we know that there was also an agreement between the defendant and Robert Baker. What's the law say? It says that all of the co-conspirators do not have to get together and have a meeting. In other words, it doesn't matter. When they were saying, well, you never spoke to Monica. They were asking Mr. Austin about this plan to kill her husband, right? No. You know, when you think about Austin, one of the things that I remembered thinking, other than his demeanor on the stand, which for someone who had never been in trial, who been charged with a crime, who, because of what his association was with Robert Baker and because of what he agreed to do in this case, his future is forever changed, right? We don't know when he's ever going to get out, right? He doesn't know that. Because he entered into a plea agreement where he has what's called an indeterminate sentence, right? 15 to life plus 1 year for the use of the knife. So when you think about his demeanor on the stand, given what has happened to him over the course of the last few months, it was striking to me, and again, I told you that the judge is going to read you instructions that give you various factors that you can take into account in judging the credibility of witnesses, such as bias, interest, motive to lie, of course. The things that, again, are based on common sense, but you can also look at things like a witness's demeanor on the stand, their attitude toward giving testimony, whether they've ever been convicted of a felony, whether they've ever admitted to lying like Baker, whether they've ever admitted to perjury, things of that nature that you know should be something you would be able to take into account, right? Those things weigh heavily on who you put your faith behind, right? So also things like, were they in a position to perceive what they said that they saw? Were they consistent or inconsistent? Were they able to recall sufficient details that tends to indicate the reliability or confirm the reliability of what they said? Is there independent evidence of what they said, right? All those kinds of things, plus more. Anything based on your common sense. You're the judges of the facts. Judge Cohen makes the decisions on the law, but you are here to judge the facts. And you have taken this so seriously over the last few months, right? This is your job. We're deadly serious, right? Because someone lost their life here. But when Austin got on the stand, even under cross-examination, he behaved better than their experts, who threw little temper tantrums on the stand. Or Baker, who said, I'm out of here, I'm done answering this silly question. No, sit down. Right? Shocking. He's not a professional. These other individuals, the divorce lawyer, the guy who's managing the estate assets, who came up with 1,000,001 reasons on why he almost missed the date to exercise the options, which means P&G had to send him letters saying, hey, buddy.
Objection, Your Honor, that was not the divorce.
Overruled.
You're getting ready. I'm not talking about the divorce lawyer. I think I was clear. I'm talking about the guy that's managing the estate, Mr. Rubin, that came back and said, oh, he's now going to build the estate maybe if he can. He's going to figure that out so he can take some more money. Because he was so great on the stand that he should be able to build the estate for his time. Who seemed offended by the fact that he had to answer questions on cross-examination. Right? Who talked over Ms. Stagel. And we saw that actually happen with both men. I'm not going to call them gentlemen, because they certainly treated the prosecutor, who just happens to be female, differently than they treated the male who asked them questions, right? Their demeanor drastically changed. Maybe I'm imagining it. Mr. Austin? He didn't do that. I'm not saying I would invite Mr. Austin over for dinner in my home. But demeanor, their attitude toward giving testimony. Mr. Baker, he treated this with such contempt. He treated you with contempt. He lied to you from moment to moment to moment, and then doubled down on it, even when it made no sense. And I'll get to that. He thinks you're stupid. I'm betting on you. Common sense. So again, the co-conspirators don't all have to meet. No express or formal agreement is necessary. You're going to hear this in the law Judge Cohen is going to read to you. As I mentioned, yesterday, as well as when Ms. Stagel and I spoke to you during jury selection, I'm going to stop. It's not because I get distracted, because I can talk over anything, but I don't want you to be distracted, because I'm talking about the law. We welcome the burden of proof. We don't shy away from it. We know we had the goods when we walked into this courtroom. That's why you're here. We've been waiting 8 years for you people. But under the law, there are certain things we don't have to prove. And you're going to hear this as well in the instructions. We do not have to prove, as I said, that the co-conspirators met or know each other. And again, going back to Austin, he could have lied, right? He could have said, hey, I was just the lookout. We wouldn't know any different. How would we prove different? Baker's saying he was only the lookout, because Baker doesn't want to have him out there on the patio with him, because it calls into question Baker's credibility about the gold coins and everything else that went down, right? So he has to paint Austin as a liar, because he sees it as a choice. You believe me? She gets out. She gets the money. She can support me from the outside. You heard them talk about that. Baby, you got to go home if you can go home. You've got support out there. And what does she tell him? Wait for me. As long as it takes. Wait for me. They're in this for the long haul. You're pawns in a game for them. Austin could have lied. He would have maybe gotten a different sentence, different plea agreement. He also could have embellished. He could have said, I absolutely talked to her. She told me she wanted her husband dead. And then you sat, that was a huge mistake, you sat and listened for a day and a half. And you all know I'll use the word meticulous because it sounds better, to a fault, right? And I questioned him till I was done, like them, till I have every answer I want, right? Because this isn't a game to me, or them, or her. I questioned him for a day and a half. Miss Stagel questioned him. Miss Stagel flew up to Vancouver, Washington, to be there, to have eyes on what happened when they took Austin down at the end of last year, to make sure everything was done by the book, to be there to support if there was any legal questions that came up. He could have said, oh yeah, I talked to her, right? Because if they're claiming he's making stuff up to get a deal, and they made this big deal out of the fact that, oh, the evidence has to have value, so he's going to add to his story. Well, if that's true, why didn't he do that? Why didn't he say, oh yeah, I talked to her. This is what she told me. Wouldn't that make his story more valuable? Maybe be willing to give him more? He didn't do that. He didn't minimize, but he didn't embellish either. So again, you're looking at details, right, that support credibility when you're making these decisions. He could have said, you know what, I do remember in Vegas. And we kept going back over that point with him. Because I knew that I had records that indicated that he and Baker were in Vegas at the same time as the defendant was. When again, she's sneaking around behind Fabio's back while he's working this event there that he's emceeing, that he's in charge of, right? Where thousands of people are going to these events. She's sneaking around and meeting up with Baker. Well, I'll talk about that. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, you know what, I totally do remember meeting with her. And this is what she told us. He doesn't say that. He says, I know we went to Vegas, and then we have to show him documents. Like, do you remember this at the Aria? Oh, yeah, we were at the Aria. But I don't remember. I might have met her. He introduced me to a lot of people, but I don't remember. So he doesn't embellish, okay? We also have to prove that the defendant personally committed an overt act. In this case, she did. She's the one that sets Fabio up and makes the calls to her daughters to make sure one leaves. She accesses the app to make sure her daughter's gone, right? Jessica, who planned the Friday before that she's going to babysit over at Deborah Obad, so they knew they had this window. Because remember, they have to make this plan B on the fly because January 22nd went sideways because Austin got cold feet, right? So January 23rd, not only does the defendant commit another overt act, and I'm going to talk about the safe too, she also calls Bella. Remember Bella getting on the stand? And Bella says, oh, I was getting ready to go home after my interview at the deli in Agora after school until my mom called and said I had to go pick up my glasses. But because I was only 16, my mom had to get special permission from the eye doctor, Dr. Cohen, so I would be able to pick those glasses up, right? Because she wants her out of the way for a sufficient period of time so that Baker can get up to the house and complete what needs to be done, right? So there's many overt acts by the defendant. But we don't have to even prove she committed an overt act. As long as we prove she was a part of, that there's an agreement between two or more, that she specifically intended to agree, that she specifically intended to have the crime committed, you see those two things are different. You have to specifically intend to agree. You also have to specifically intend to have the crime committed. You have to act with intent to kill. And that there's an overt act. Doesn't have to be by her. And again, we talked about this yesterday when we discussed a theory of first-degree murder. You all don't have to even be unanimous as to which overt act was proven in this case. There are 56 of them. I don't know if you remember, but way back at the beginning of the trial, before we started, the judge read you the indictment from the grand jury, indicting the defendant and Robert Baker. And within that indictment, and this is a document where the defendant and Baker were indicted back in, I believe it was August of 2017, we listed overt acts based on the evidence we knew at that time. Now, one of the reasons to bring somebody like Christopher Austin in is because he's able to clarify for us some of the inside details we wouldn't otherwise know. So some of those overt acts might not apply because he provided other information that now we decided maybe weren't proven or were disproven because of his inside information, or maybe other records were received. You heard that there was a lot of investigation, documentation, and evidence that was constantly being added to the investigative file in this case. And so you all don't have to be unanimous on which overt act as long as you all agree that there's one. And you have 56 to choose from. You might like number 1, you might like 2. It doesn't even matter. As long as you all agree that there's one, you're not going to be asked on the verdict forms which overt act you guys believe was proven in this case. It's just going to ask whether or not you find the defendant guilty or not guilty of the crime of conspiracy. Okay? So, as I mentioned, the words overt act, again, I like to break things down into simple forms. It helps me to understand and make sense of it in a common sense way. In this case, what is an overt act? Well, it's any step or act that's committed by one or more of the conspirators. So again, doesn't have to be the defendant. One or more of the conspirators have to take some act or some step to accomplish the object of the conspiracy. In this case, it's murder. So what the law says, and what the judge is going to read you, is that the overt act has to go beyond mere planning. In other words, the fact that they sat around in Las Vegas and talked about what was the best way to accomplish this, that's not enough. It has to go further than that. Just sitting around talking about it isn't enough. There has to be some act, right? And so then we also heard there's some more planning that goes on that we talked about yesterday between in the month of January, a couple weeks out from when Austin flies in, between January 11th and January 13th, January 12th, there's actually the purchase of airline tickets. So maybe have we known about that? Maybe that would be an overt act. There has to be some act that goes beyond mere planning or agreement. It doesn't have to be an act that constitutes the crime. It doesn't even have to be an attempt. Now, January 22nd, had we known about that before, that's its own conspiracy to commit murder. Okay? But in this case, we're here at this point. So it's evidence that you can use to show, like I said yesterday, very unlikely that Baker and Austin get so lucky that they get Fabio alone once, let alone 2 days in a row. That comes based on information the defendant provides. Okay? So, again, the overt act doesn't have to constitute the crime of murder or even an attempt. So, let's say Baker renting the vehicle. That would be an overt act. And again, that overt act, that step taken, such as the movement of money from Baker's account so that Austin can withdraw it while he's in Alaska, that would be one. Of course, again, this is stuff that happened and we found out about after the fact. So we're stuck with the overt acts that were alleged in the information way back in August of 2017, what we knew about at that time. You'll be given the overt acts that are in the indictment, and as I said, you can go through that, and as long as you all agree that at least one of those overt acts applies, then you're good to go. So you'll go through those as well, and from that, you'll have plenty of choices in terms of which overt act. By the way, although Austin doesn't have a clear memory of meeting the defendant at the ARIA, he knows there's evidence that suggests that they did, but he's not going to admit to something that he doesn't know. And so you heard him say, that's just not something in his proffer that I have a clear recollection of, because I've told him, hey, if I find out you lied about something, I'm not making any deals with you. Like you heard. There are certain people, the defense kept saying, well, you're a prosecution witness. The prosecution was supposed to call you. Witnesses don't belong to either side. Either side can have a subpoena issued and call whoever they choose. But we also have the choice not to call people that we believe are going to lie. For instance, Miss Obad was asked, well, you were a prosecution witness. You've talked to the prosecutor. You've talked to law enforcement. You were interviewed. You testified at the grand jury. But then it was asked, when was the last time you had any conversation or communication with the DA's office? 4 years ago. Okay. So we can choose not to call certain people that we believe are going to get on the stand and commit perjury. So Austin, who doesn't have a clear memory of meeting the defendant, now you need to go back and ask yourself, when Baker got on the stand and he went out of his way to say, oh, I left him over at this location and then I went over here to meet Monica, he could have left Austin at Al Birdsong's. Why does he bring Austin with him to the ARIA when he's going there to meet up with the defendant? And remember, Baker also told the defense investigator, which I asked him about, the specifics. They didn't bring out all of these lies that he told over and over and over again throughout this series of ridiculous, unrecorded interviews, and some where there's a report and the notes were destroyed, and some of them we can see when we have both notes and reports that he doesn't include everything, the defense investigator, in the report. You have to go hunting through his chicken scratches to find details he chose not to include in his report. But he tells the defense investigator, I told Austin before we even went in July, hey, I might go over to meet up with Monica while we're in Las Vegas. Why do you think he brought Austin with him when he went to the ARIA to meet up with the defendant? So the point is that we know, based on cell phone records, call detail records, cell tower records, and the testimony of Cy Ray, who's a geolocation expert, that these three are all together at the ARIA at the same time. Fabio and the defendant are there. However, Fabio, we know the day that they go to the ARIA, he's down the strip a ways at Mandalay Bay at another event that was being hosted that week for the industry. So again, we know that the defendant and Baker had ample opportunity to plan this crime when they were together, not just based on what's in their volume of communications, but we know that they have face-to-face communication, right? There's pillow talk. There's times when they're together alone where they had the opportunity to plan this, and there isn't going to necessarily be, let's say, a paper trail. They also, as we know, were using an encrypted app to be able to communicate secretly. And the defense brought up over and over again, well, you know, these encrypted apps, they're used by people all over the country. Absolutely, right? A little bit different back in 2017, right? We heard about that from the testimony of Curtis Davis. They weren't being used as much in this country at that time, but people who traveled internationally did, because you could talk to somebody, communicate with them for free through these encrypted applications without paying these data fees. However, keep in mind, we're not looking at what they kept doing throughout the whole trial, and they're going to do again when they get back up here. We're not looking at individual pieces of evidence in a vacuum. We're looking at the evidence in totality, which is what you heard from, again, Detective Gable, Detective Verna, and Detective Roberts. You're looking at all of the circumstances of the behavior together as a whole. When you look at items in a vacuum, they don't tell you anything. They're only significant or important or probative in terms of how they relate to other evidence in the case, right? Then it has some meaning. And when you're talking about, as you heard, criminals who are involved in planning a crime, a conspiracy, or a criminal enterprise, these types of applications are often used by criminals because it allows them to hide their communication. Same reason why individuals who are involved in a criminal conspiracy use a burner phone. Again, does that mean that other people don't go and pick up a cheap phone at T-Mobile or wherever you get those from, the market? Used to be able to get them at the market? No, but you're looking at them again as a part of the evidence in its totality. And if you're using a burner phone and you're using encrypted applications and there's evidence that shows that you're participating in a criminal conspiracy to kill somebody, you're going to want to hide your communications. By using a burner phone, we can't get those types of pieces of information as we did, let's say, from the defendant's iPhone, number 119 that was seized when she was pulled over, along with her burner phone, the ZTE flip phone, if you remember. 119 is her Apple iPhone, 120 is the ZTE flip phone. Both of them are in her purse inside the Mustang at the time that she's arrested on June 14th. And I'll talk more about that burner phone a little bit later. So again, when you're talking about all of these different types of secret methods or modes of communication where you don't have to leave your name, you don't have to leave your address, you can make up addresses, which we heard Baker did on January 29th when he goes up to, I think it was Victorville, to purchase all these burner phones, 3 different burner phones. It allows you to hide your communications. So again, think about that when you're asked to look at things in a vacuum. The law specifically says that when you come to your decisions, you have to base your decisions on the evidence, and you have to look at all of the evidence in light of the other pieces of evidence and the circumstances of the crimes. So again, we know that we heard in this case evidence where the defendant is discussing with Baker in the court lockup recordings that she was afraid that law enforcement would be able to get into her phone. And remember, she makes those comments about, I'm afraid they're going to crack my phone. If they get into the phone, I'm fucked. Right? She says that one day. And another recording, she says, if they're able to get into Viber. And he goes, what? And she goes, Viber. Right? She's whispering because she doesn't want to be caught, because we also heard that they know they're being recorded, right? They say that from minute 1 in the back of the black and white police vehicle. Keep in mind the circumstances. They're not being put into the back of a black and white police vehicle with all of Robbery Homicide Division and SIS surveillance unit and taken down with a police operations van because they're having an affair? Are you kidding me? Who's going to believe that? That's not what's happening. They know they're being arrested for murder. So when the defense says, oh no, the only thing they were worried about, and the only reason they're using all of these different things like burner phones and encrypted applications and whispering is because they're covering up for an affair. Really? Come on. Come on now. So we hear her also talking about Viber. Viber. What if they find out about Viber? Because again, if the police are able to get into the phone, we did. But you're only able to recover certain things because what do? They delete Viber. How do you know they're acting together? They both deleted on January 23rd, the day of the murder. Coincidence? I mean, at what point are there too many coincidences to be able to call them coincidences? Right? Like if you have like a button, like that commercial from one of those stores where it's like, hit the button every time, that doesn't make sense. Tell me when I get to that point. When I have too many coincidences, tell me when I get to that point and you'll hit the button. Too many. We're way down that road. Because again, once they delete Viber, what happens? It deletes all of the connecting data through Viber. You might have remnants, which is how we found out they were using Viber, because when their phones were extracted, we saw that, and you heard Curtis Davis testify about that, who's the LAPD's expert on social media and encrypted apps and things of that nature. And then we go and we get the Viber records for January, and lo and behold, you've got this huge volume of communications between them. If they weren't involved in a murder, why do they need to whisper? Why do they need encrypted apps? Why do you need to use an encrypted app after Fabio's dead? You're no longer got the excuse, well, we use Viber because we're covering up the affair, because what if Fabio looks in her phone? Right? And what is Baker's excuse on why Viber, why they both, he says he told her delete Viber. Why do they delete Viber on January 23rd? What's his excuse? Yeah. It's glitchy. It was glitchy. Well, it worked so far. Like, why all of a sudden is it so glitchy? I don't know. It was just glitchy. It was glitchy. Right? So then I started parroting it back to him on various things. He didn't catch on. But why, after the 23rd, when they both delete Viber, why do they then, again, 3 people who just have to be involved in this conspiracy to kill, Baker, the defendant, Austin, why do they all download the same application, WhatsApp? Coincidence? I'm hitting the button. Common sense. And you might have all been wondering during jury selection, why'd they leave me on this case? Street smarts. Common sense. Doesn't matter how young you are, doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter if you wear glasses, doesn't matter the color of your skin, doesn't matter what socioeconomic group you come from. None of it matters. Common sense. It's the only thing that matters. You're experts in that. I have faith. So again, look at the evidence in a common sense way. Break it down. Make it simple. It's not that complicated. They made it super complicated. Why did they do that? They wanted to make it impossible. Impossible for anybody to unravel and figure out all the details. I'm no genius. I did it. So they discuss how it's going to be done. They can do it face-to-face. They can do it using encrypted apps. They can do it using burner phones. They also discuss when the murder is going to take place. We talked about that spike in data Detective Roberts testified to in January. And then we also heard this little piece of evidence, remember, from Austin, which was, again, there's little pieces of gold. And when they played back the proffer over 2 days, and I know, I have a very annoying, I can hear it, a very annoying nasally voice, but I could hear in the questioning where Austin gave details about things that the first time through I didn't necessarily catch. I knew it was there, but I was focused on the answer and how that related to the next question. Because when you, again, are questioning a witness, one of the most important things, which, anyway, not everybody does, is you're too focused on the next question and you forget to listen to what they're saying. And what we heard in those recordings of the proffer was that he was told by Baker that they had to get the murder done. Remember this? Before the end of January, because Fabio was going on a business trip. Lo and behold, Fabio is set to leave for Boston on January 28th. That's Exhibit 261, his travel agenda that was sent to the defendant. As Alicia testified, she always sent Fabio's agendas to the defendant so that she would know his itinerary, where he was staying, where he was going, when he was coming back, things of that nature. So obviously, Baker gets that little tidbit from Monica. She tells him about that. That's why they have to get this done. Now, this is just a very simplified way, and I've obviously gone way beyond this slide off my script again. But again, we have the defendant who has to be the mastermind. Why does she have to be the mastermind besides the fact that Baker can't keep anything in his brain for more than a half a minute? Because she has the inside information. She knows what the family's schedule is, right? She's the mastermind. She wants Fabio dead so that she can collect the life insurance proceeds and so that she can live the life that she wants to live, where she feels free, as Baker said, where she's most happy. So she makes an agreement with Baker. Baker hatches the plan with her to kill Fabio, but since he's doing the dirty work and he knows Fabio is a very large, tall man, much bigger than Baker, he knows he needs help. And he needs, again, a patsy, someone loyal to him who will do what he needs them to do without asking questions, who will just follow Baker's lead. And that's Chris Austin. So he is enlisted by Baker to assist in the murder of Fabio. And it worked. So one of the things that the law says is that when you are using the testimony of an accomplice, and in this case, Baker's an accomplice, Austin's an accomplice. When I say accomplice, I mean someone who is subject to prosecution for the same crime. And we know, obviously, Baker is an accomplice because he pled to the conspiracy, right? And he pled to the murder. Austin, he pleads to the murder because he admitted to being a direct perpetrator, a stabber, a killer, right? When you are using an accomplice, you have to have, either side, you have to have independent evidence that connects the defendant to a crime, okay? Independent evidence, which is what I've been speaking to you about basically for the last half an hour or so. Makes sense again. Like I said, the law contemplates all of these things because you don't want to believe somebody who's an accomplice, who therefore may have a motive to lie or an interest in the outcome of the prosecution, without knowing the person has some independent credibility. Like I said, always the most important. What verifies what he said, right? So you're already going to start out with a strike against you. You can go up or down from there, right? Baker went down and he went down and he just kept going down. But Austin, we had to look for independent evidence. And even though the law says that the corroboration you're looking for is separate evidence than what the accomplice testified to that connects the defendant to the crime, I'm telling you, in addition to that, make sure that before you believe one of the two accomplices in this case, that you have independent evidence that verifies, like I said in the proffer agreement, that verifies, that corroborates, that proves independently that what they're telling you is true. Because you want to make sure that you're putting your faith, your trust in the right person, right? And so the law says just that you have to have independent evidence tending to connect the defendant to the crime of murder. And there is a ton of that, which I've talked about. So what you do is you go back a step. You go back to before November of last year, when finally there was sufficient evidence to go up and take Mr. Austin into custody, regardless of whether or not he gave up anything. He was coming to LA. He was going to be prosecuted. So take him out of the case. Take out his testimony. It's easy to do. He didn't come till very late in the people's case. Take him out of the case and look at what's left. What do you have? Well, independently from records, we can put from the cell phone and cell tower records and Cyray's testimony, we can put Baker at that strip mall the same time as Fabio on January 22nd, right? We have cell tower records. We have cell tower records that show that Baker goes to LAX to pick up Austin on the morning of January 22nd. We have cell tower records that show that Baker took Austin to the area of the flyaway on the 23rd. We have now a ticket, we don't need Austin to tell us, we have a ticket putting Austin in the rental car, and we have cell tower records, cell data, showing that Baker, when the defendant calls him later in the morning on January 23rd, putting him at the location of the Enterprise rental car, where he gets his friend Paula to rent him a car, because now his cars are glitchy. We know that Baker, again, from these independent records, isn't just at the strip mall when Fabio shows up there in the evening on January 22nd, that Sunday, but also cell tower records that put Baker waiting at that location for a couple of hours before Fabio even shows up there. Again, as I talked about yesterday, coincidence? Or am I hitting the button because it doesn't pass the smell test? No, it's inside information. He doesn't have a crystal ball. We have the text string between the defendant and Fabio on January 22nd regarding picking up faux near me. We have the defendant's Google search where she's looking for faux places near me. And then she specifically Googles this location off Ventura Boulevard, faux California, or faux CA. I believe CA stands for California. So the defendant is already figuring out where she's sending Fabio. And then we have more. We have then the defendant, to cover it up and make it look like this is just innocent. I'm sending my husband out on Sunday night to pick up Fa. She texts Bella, "Do you want fried rice?" More. And again, this is not exhaustive because you can see I could be up here for probably weeks and I won't run out. Mrs. Baker, she writes that on the mirror. She signs her letters that way, before and after the murder. As I talked about, the use of these encrypted apps, and then the deletion of the encrypted apps. The destruction of evidence. Remember, we heard the defendant and Baker again in the overhears. Again, these individuals know they're being recorded. They know it. But at some point, they forget. Even as they're telling each other, we're so smart. We're smarter. We're unique. We're special, baby. No, they do the same thing all the other morons do back there. They eventually forget they're being recorded and they talk. And she says, they're going to look at your computer. My what? Your computer. Gone. What? Gone. Gone? Yeah, can you believe it? It broke the day before. No good. Got rid of it. Remember that? And then there was that whole ridiculous, now it's coming back to me, line of questions where I asked him about that, and he said, oh, his his computer had been stolen out of his car. Remember that whole thing? Anyway. The testimony of Cyré, that's independent. The level of communications between them. Cyré told you these are extreme. I don't think you needed him to tell you that. Thousands. And what about when they get put into, as I said earlier, the back of the patrol vehicle? Again, you think deny everything? When the defendant said that to Baker, deny everything. You think she's talking about an affair? You think they think they're being put in the back of a patrol car for an affair? Because these guys, they don't got enough to do? More. What about, and I'm going to get into this, what about all of her lies? Her lies to law enforcement, where they kept pounding on this same topic over and over and over again. Wasn't she calling you? Didn't she want to know about the investigation? She wanted to know, what were you doing to solve her husband's murder? No, that's not why she was calling. She wanted to know what the investigative information was so they could prepare for it. She asked specifically, what about the DNA? Over and over and over. And Detective Parshall and Detective Verna did exactly what they were supposed to do. They're not going to give up info. They're going to play that close to the vest. Well, nothing came back. It all came back to Fabio. So that puts her at ease. Because, again, they know. She knows Baker cut himself at the scene. And so they're worried whether or not his DNA is going to come back in any of these crime scene samples. And so, again, this ridiculous racquetball story. The problem is with the racquetball story, and I'm sure you've probably already put this together, there's numerous problems that we'll talk about. Matt Nurse saw them there that morning, never saw them play racquetball. Jessica, at the time this is fresh in her mind, is interviewed by law enforcement. She goes to the gym with mom, they work out, they go on the treadmill, no racquetball. The defendant is interviewed over and over and over again about the details of what she did on January 23rd, never mentions racquetball, never mentions any injury. Delia's there that day. So we know she doesn't come home dripping blood from some towel or whatever you want to believe she would have had to have bring home in order to get blood all over the house and smeared onto objects in her bedroom that are rifled through and left in the sink. Delia's cleaned that place up. None of that stuff was there. Why would Delia lie? She didn't. And there's no blood on the racket. Either racket. So that story fails. And then we hear them in the back of the in the lockup talking about the racquetball story. Well, maybe it wasn't that day. Maybe it was another day, because Jessica said we didn't play that day, but we did play that day. Oh, did you tell them? Did you tell them that you cracked me in the hand with the racket? Right? And then there's no records of it at LA Fitness, as Matt says. And then Sheila gets up on the stand and says, we were there that night. We didn't see Baker that night. The first time I saw him, he had somebody take over the league. It was later on that week, and I noticed that night, I think it was Thursday, that he had an open cut on his finger. The next time I saw it, it was bandaged. He told us about the murder. We didn't even know about the murder. But he wasn't at the gym that night. Baker said, oh no, I went there to make an alibi. Remember that? And I asked him, well, how is it an alibi? It's not for the time period during the murder. It's not proof of anything. So again, it's this big messed up story that they're trying to use to explain away the DNA evidence of the crime scene. And again, as I said, you probably have already figured this out, but the one piece of evidence then that they can't explain away is then, if that's the explanation on why you think the DNA or Baker's DNA is there because of suddenly this racquetball accident on the day when you're arrested, and you volunteer this statement to Detective Gable when he tells you about Baker's DNA. How does it explain away Baker's DNA in the Porsche? Again, fatal flaw. And then there's more. As I talked about, sending Bella to pick up the glasses, the meetup at the Target, which we spent all this time running around with, and then Baker just gets up there, admits it, and tells the defense investigator there that he went to Target to meet up with her. The use of the burner phones, and then, of course, as I mentioned, the destruction of evidence, which, as I told you, is, bless you, evidence of consciousness of guilt. And again, it goes on. Post-murder conduct, leaving the daughters alone. Who in their right mind would do that? We even heard about that, bless you, from Deborah Obad. She's talking to Parshall. She's telling him how he should investigate this case because she's Nancy Drew. And so they start calling her Nancy Drew because she keeps referring to herself that way, and she thinks she's part of the investigation, and they must need her help because she's brilliant. Just ask her. And they tell her, yeah, I wouldn't leave my daughters at home in that house. And she says, yeah, me neither, right? But she's a good friend. She's not going to confront the defendant. She's a good friend because as she's doing all this, calling Parshall 50 times, and she was offended. Remember when Ms. Stagel asked her, well, did you know you were being recorded? No, I did not. Okay. But their transcripts are wrong. Well, transcripts are made from a recording. Well, the defense investigator's reports are wrong. Okay. That one I'll believe. Lack of concern for the daughters. Now, here's something I want to bring up. And it relates back to the FA pickup and all those messages and Google searches. If you're just sending your husband out on a Sunday night to pick up dinner, and I don't care if we're talking about Chinese food, if we're talking about Mexican food, if we're talking about Vietnamese spa, why do you need to delete your Google searches? She does that because she doesn't think Fabio's coming back, right? And so there's going to be an investigation. The same, what was the word? I can't remember now the word. I'll think of it. That Deborah used. The same suspicious behavior, the same behavior that shows consciousness of guilt that she does on the 23rd. Remember on the 23rd when she goes into Ralph's? What did Cyree say that she does in the 10 minutes she's in Ralph's? She deletes Lifestyle Lounge and a bunch of other things from her phone. Right?
Council, I'm going to interrupt you this time. Let's take our morning recess for 15 minutes. The admonition applies. I'll see you here in 15.